Well, hello. So another Thursday night, and I've got the second night of binding tonight. So last week we talked about how to work out how much fabric you should buy to make your binding around the edge of your quilt. If you missed it, just go back through our feed and you'll find it there. Tonight we're going to talk about how to cut your binding and how to join your binding pieces together so that you can then go ahead and stitch it around your quilt. And then next week, I'm going to show you how to stitch it on your quilt and how to join it up at the end. All right, so first of all, I have the most annoying jumper with baggy sleeves, so they're going to bother me all night. All right, first of all, binding around the edge of your quilt. So just a refresher, this is your binding here, this nice edge that hides all the raw edges of your quilted patchwork project. We're going to cut some binding out of fabric, and I'm going to show you how to do that, how to get it straight, and also talk about the tools that you need. Now, for tonight's video, we're going to need a little more specific tools than the norm. It is almost impossible to cut good binding with a pair of scissors. If you're up to binding stuff, it's time to get yourself a rotary cutter, a cutting mat, and a ruler. A good place to start is those three things: a ruler and a mat that will fit 50 centimeters of fabric on it, and a 45mm rotary cutter. We sell different ones here, but the price is around about 30 bucks. The rotary cutter, around about 25 to 30 for the 24-inch long ruler, and around about 55 for the big mat. So if someone asks you what you want for a birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day, and you haven't got these things yet, they are the next step to your creative sewing. Now, I'm going to use a smaller rule tonight because I'm doing this sitting down, and it's going to be a little bit easier for me to move it around. So I've got this very handy 18-inch ruler. I love this. It's a good balance between too big and too small. So we're going to use that tonight. So park this one. Poof. All right, so fabric for binding. Let's talk patchwork fabric for a second. Do all your patchwork quilts now out of 100% cotton patchwork fabric. Don't use polycotton. Polycotton is horrible to sew. It's hard to cut. It's hard to use. So you want cotton patchwork fabric. If you're buying it from Spotlight, check the feel of it. If it feels lumpy and slubby, you've put that away and get yourself something that feels a little bit smoother, so a little bit smoother and percale. They've got a nice range of fabric there, and it reflects the price. It's a little bit cheaper, it tends to be a little bit less quality. The more you pay for patchwork fabric, the better the quality is. And if you feel like you might have outgrown the Spotlight stuff, get in the car with a couple of friends and go and visit some of the beautiful patchwork shops that we still have kicking around. There's some lovely ones up the coast, some lovely ones into Brisbane. But once you start going into those patchwork fabric shops with the beautiful fabric, you'll realize that there's so much more variety for you to choose from, and it will make what we're going to do next a little bit easier. Let me explain why. So I'm going to use some of this patchwork fabric that I have that has a little Star Wars theme on it. So let's talk fabric direction. So here you can see that there's a distinct direction of this patchwork fabric. See, it goes across here like so, and up and down like so. What fabric prints sometimes don't do is the direction of the fabric print may not always go in the same direction as the grain of the fabric. That is the way the fabric is woven, up and down and left and right. And in my experience, the less per meter the fabric is, the more likely that your fabric direction here, your crisscross and up and down, will be away from the actual direction of the weave of the fabric. So I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. I personally think for the work that I do that you should use the direction of the print and you should cut with the print. Some people who are incredibly careful with what they do when they patchwork, they will tell you that you should cut with the grain. So if we were to cut with the grain with this fabric here, and let me show you, here's the selvage here, and I'm going to go right angles from the selvage, and that's the grain that way. Do you see that? So if I was to cut with the grain here, you can see where I am in the pattern here, but by the time I get down here, the pattern has moved. So these pieces will actually look crooked in my work, and I don't want that. So I would opt to choose to cut with the grain, with the pattern, and ignore the grain a little bit. There are some things you can't do that for. It depends on the use, but for just square binding that we're going to put around the edge of our quilt, we're going to get away with it. So grain, you can. There's the right way to do it technically, but pattern is the prettier way to do it. So we're going to work with the pattern tonight and use the pattern to make our binding. Now, first things first, we want to cut off this selvage here, and you'll notice that that is too long for my little ruler. So I'm going to fold this in half, like so. Oh, I've ironed it too. Always iron it. And if you've got some Best Press starch, give it a spray when you iron it with Best Press. You'll get a really nice, easy to use finish. Now we're going to fold this in half, and we aren't going to try and line up our selvage so much. We're going to line up our pattern as we fold it in half. So I'm lining up my pattern there, and we're going to cut off the selvage. So by folding it in half, we've got ourselves a smaller space that we can cut. Here we go. To cut this, I have a long edge of my ruler, and I have a right angle across the ruler, and all these lines are at right angles to this long edge, so they are perpendicular. We're going to take a perpendicular line and line it up with the fold. Can you see that? Do I need to move up a little bit? There we go. So this line here, I am going to have it line up with the fold. And all this excess selvage here, we're going to cut this off. So because I am a righty, the work I want to keep is on the left and under the ruler. If I was a lefty like my mum, hi mum, I would flip this over and cut this side with my left hand. So right hand is where the stuff is we're going to chop off. So now, holding this with my fingers, not the flat of my hand, like so, rotary cutter is open. I'm going to start down here like an inch before I need to cut and roll on up onto my fabric, push down with a little bit of strength and off the other edge, and I have cut off that selvage that we don't want. Chuck it over there. Corey can pick that up in the morning. Alrighty, so now we have a straight edge. That's cool, but how do we make that into selvage? Your mat will have measurements on it, and most of the time we ignore them. Let's use our ruler. It makes it easier. So at this point here, we're going to take our ruler off and carefully pick this up and flip it over like so. So we now have a straight edge here, and we're going to just do it crookedly on the numbers just so that there's no confusion as to how I'm measuring it. See, it's crooked on the mat. Doesn't matter because we ignore these numbers on the mat. Straight edge here is right angles to this here because that's how we cut it. So now I know that whatever I cut here, I've got a straight edge, and the second cut that I do will also be a straight edge. So I need my binding fabric to be 2.5 inches wide. Now, trick. Most of your patchwork rulers are like, can you see if I do it like, I might just move this here out the way for a second. You can see that better. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4.5 inches. Do you see that there? So we would count across 2.5 inches for us is half, 1, 2. That's 2.5 inches. Count it every single time out loud because you'll be surprised, particularly on bigger, wider cuts, how often you cut 3.5 instead of 2.5 or 4.5 instead of 5.5. So we want to cut 2.5 inches. So there's a half, 1, 2. 2.5 inches is this line here. Do you see that? So we get this guy down here. Now, if I put my ruler down this way with the edge here and count across 1, 2, 2.5, that line there, I need to cut there, and I can't because this is in the way. So we're actually going to flip our ruler over so that our 1/2 inch is on our cutting side. So for righties tonight, it's going to be on the right hand side, and we're going to line up our 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, 2.5 inches line here with that cut that we've made in the fabric. So you can see that, there we go. This line lines up here, and double check that we still have a line that's nice and neat here at a right angle, perpendicular. So 1, 2, 2.5, holding the ruler with our fingers, not the flat of our hand. Rotary cutter beforehand. Whoops, it's tricky through the camera. Slide and cut. And we have made a 2.5 inch piece. Cool, so there is our first piece of binding. Now, the thing that I've done is I haven't given any thought to the print. At the moment, I've done this like so the print goes up and down. But when it comes to binding, what will happen with this fabric is this fabric will be pressed over and folded in half. So that means that when I go to put the binding on my quilt, like so, my pattern is going to be facing up this way here. But as I go around and come back down the other side, my pattern is going to be facing down over here. And we actually don't want that. So when we cut binding, it's usually better to cut across the print instead of up and down. So instead of going that way, we're going to fold it in half. So I'm folding along this print here. So here's my print, folding along and joining up my print here. Now, this is a really good example of fabric that's not been printed real crash hot. That was square in the other direction, but look how wobbly it is when I folded it at right angles to itself with the print. So we're going to square that off and keep on going. So here is our print here, lined up. See that? Just line it up, slide it over, and then let's square off this end again. So line on the ruler crossways, line it up with the fold, and don't be precious, don't make life tough for yourself. Cut off a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, get it nice and square. So hold it with my fingers, not my hand. Up we go, and cut that off. We've got a nice straight edge. We're now going to flip that over and measure again 2.5 inches from that cut that we've made. So 1, 2.5, 1/2 inches on my cutting side. So for me as a righty, it's on my right side. For my mum, it would be on my left side. I'm going to lie this down, line up here so that it's parallel, and on that line across here, which is perpendicular and is also lined up on that fold. Hold this and then chop it. Here we go. Oops. Do it again and roll in and chop it. So now we have our binding piece, so that when we fold it over to use it, we have the pattern going in the same direction all the way around the outside of the quilt. So typically your pattern will go across. Now, we're going to go ahead and repeat that, and we're going to repeat that to cut. Remember, we worked out last week that we had maybe 10 cuts that we needed, and we're going to go ahead and cut 10 2.5 inch strips and then join them together. Now I'm going to cut just one more strip, so go ahead and square that line against there and cut it here so that I can show you how to join it. But what I want to tell you is if you're going to cut 10 strips of binding like this, get that out of the way, Penny, silly gilly. If you just cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut to use up your fabric, with each cut you're going to be slightly wobbly, particularly at the top as your hand gets weaker, particularly across a full width of fabric. So as you start to cut, your ruler starts to move, and I'll exaggerate, your ruler starts to move like this. So that means that your cut, when you cut several of them, so let's just do this an example, once your ruler starts to be wobbly, the piece that you cut when you open it up is no longer a straight line. It starts to be, see that little V shape going on there? And that's no good. So what you want to do, I have a rule of 4. Every 4th cut, I flip my fabric back over the other way, square it off along the bottom fold here again, find as much fabric that I have to cut here, and then cut off that wobble. And then flip it back over and keep on going to cut the rest of your 2.5 inch strips. Cool? So, and that's true for everything where you're strip cutting. If you're going to do a quilt that's, you know, make your own rainbow quilt or something like that with lots and lots of 2.5 inch strips, don't just cut them all over and over and over, because you will get them more and more and more bendy. What you want to do is you want to cut 4, flip it back the other way, square it off, flip it over, and then keep on going, and that will fix any problems you guys are having where you're cutting them and then finding your whole quilt starting to do this sort of shenanigans. Cool? Cool. All right, so one last thing I will touch base on. You'll notice that the print, oh, this is a reject, we'll chuck that over here. We'll notice that the print here goes across here, but the print here doesn't. Do you see that? so that these guys here are at a different height. You can fix that, but it means that you have to waste a lot of fabric to do it. So to get it so that your fabric is the same pattern repeat all the way along your binding, it's difficult to cut and it's difficult to sew, but it is doable. I'm not going to cover it tonight, but I might do it in another lesson. We're going to be happy with this tonight. That will do the job for us. All right, so how to join these pieces together? Simple, I hear you think. You're going to go ahead and put these two ends together like so, and then go ahead and sew down them. If we do that, if we sew down here, and let's say we sew just here, coolio. Once we do that and open up our quilt, that looks groovy. Sorry, our binding, not our quilt. That looks groovy, but all of your quilt binding is done by folding it on itself, several times sometimes, folding it on itself. If we fold it on itself here at the moment, at the top we have 1, 2, 3 layers of fabric. If we fold it in half on itself, all of a sudden we have 2 layers of fabric here and 6 layers of fabric in our fold here and 2 layers of fabric again here. So you're going to get this thick bump when you're sewing, and also this very thick obvious bump when you are looking at your binding. So we're going to join it in a way that lets all the edges sort of fold over and miss each other to give a better result. Alrighty, so let's do that. Step 2. I don't know, did I say steps? Anyway, steps 2. Time, I don't know what the time is. I don't know what the time is. Can someone tell me what the time is? My watch is flat. All right, so step 2. You're going to get 2 pieces of quilt binding pattern up, like so. So right side up, and you are going to put them side by side, and then this one is going to stay right where it is, and then this one, we are going to flip it over so that it is right side down and crisscrossed like so. So just do that again so you can see it. At the moment they're side by side with the pattern up the right way. We are going to flip the one on the right over and crisscross it so they are right sides facing each other. So if you were to stretch this back out, you can see your right direction pattern is this way, pattern direction is that way, which is what we want. Once you have it like so, and some people think you got to do it like this, chillax, you don't need to make it that tough. We're going to go ahead and do it so it is quite separated. We're going to use our mat now. I'm going to line this up here with one of the lines in our mat, and then this one that comes down, we're going to line it up here with one of the lines that go down in our mat, and that makes sure that we get a 90-degree square in the corner here. Cool. Once that's done, now my mum will tell you if I can not pin something I won't, but I pin this stuff, so pin it. Alrighty, you're going to pop a pin up here in this top right corner, and you're going to pop another pin here in this bottom left corner, like so. Oh, hang on, not like so, like so. Once you've done that, you are going to need your good old Duo fabric pen, and I love this little 1/4-inch ruler that I sell. We're going to line up the edge of that 1/4-inch ruler with this corner here and with this corner here, and I'm going to take my best guess with my camera. We're going to go ahead and draw a line like so. Can you see that? So we've drawn a line from here to here, we've pinned it here and here, and so now I'm going to seamlessly drag the sewing machine over here and sew that. So just talk amongst yourselves for a second while I drag the machine over. Come on, baby. Da, da, da. It's alive. All right, so I'm working on our little brother A16 tonight. This is a great little machine that has just a few good stitches to do what it has to do, and I'm going to choose a straight stitch and in the middle of the foot, and I'm going to fix that so you can see it. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to set a stitch length. It's normally 2.5. I'm going to stitch length down to 1.8, and then take this one here, and we're going to go ahead and sew from here to here. Now, I got hoisted by my own petard one day, and I told you that you didn't have to backwards and forwards here, but I have changed my mind, and you do now have to do that. I did another demonstration, but it all went pear-shaped when I didn't. So we're going to go backwards and forwards at the start and backwards and forwards at the finish to lock it in. But we aren't going to start just here. We're going to start about here. We're going to start here and go backwards and then come down, and that will stop all of this from getting dragged up under the weight of those beginner stitches. So start here, go backwards, and then go forwards. So needle down, and I'm just going to go backwards and just hold that reverse button down, go back along that line, and then scoot forwards. Let's see how we go. Oh, foot control is on slow. Let's go high. Down to the other end, and then a nice reverse backwards. And here's a bit of a tip. If you find your fabric is gathering and puckering when you're going backwards and forwards, try reducing your stitch length from 2.5 to 1.8. It gives less room for the fabric to gather and you'll get a smoother result. So now, needle up, lift this up, and quote Christine, we're going to chop it like so. And I'm just going to go ahead and park our machine because that's all we needed it for tonight. There you go, sweetheart, back over there. Good girl. All right, so let's have a look at what we've got. This here, like so. Oh, that camera angle's no good. Let's tweak it a little bit. There we go. So what we have done is we have joined right along here. Cut off my loose bits because Mum's watching and she'll be like, Penny, you didn't cut those loose bits off. All right, chop, chop, like so, and like so. Alrighty, so now what you have done is you have created a diagonal join in your work. This stuff here, we don't need that anymore. Typically, I don't trim this off until I finish joining up all my binding, just in case there's some sort of drama and I need to rescue myself. But for tonight, I'm just going to go ahead with a pair of scissors. And you don't have to be too pedantic. Give yourself a good guess of what you think a 1/4 inch will be. And it's one of those few things where if you don't get this 1/4 inch right, nobody cares. It doesn't really matter. Not too close to the stitches that they fray out. Not too big that it's clunky. And you have now chopped it like this. And then I'm going to fold this open and press it down. So you can see here now we have a diagonal join in our quilt, in our quilt binding, like so. And then when we fold our binding in half for the next step, because this is at a 45-degree angle, when we fold it over, we now have just this bit and this bit out on their own instead of one big, huge, chunky, lumpy seam. And that is your quilt binding joined. Now you'll repeat along the way as you go along. Remember that you want to make sure that chop, 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 chop. Just ignore this, don't chop it. But you want to make sure that the next bit that you put on, make sure both of the directions of the fabrics are pointing in the same way, and then it is right side down, and always sewing from the fullest side where everything is to the least full side where the seam allowance is, and then keep on going. This is a little bit harder on plain fabric because there's no right or wrong side with plain fabric. Not a big drama as far as when you flip it over, how does it look? But there is a big drama. You want to make sure that you keep consistently doing it with what you have made the right side up is always up, so that you don't end up with this bit joined this way, but down here, this bit joined this way. So take your time and do this slowly. And then once you've done your binding, you go on and make it all together. Once it's all joined up for the length you need for your quilt, always a good idea to have more, and I like to have a full width of fabric more, a whole meter more, because what we talk about next week will be how to put this on your quilt, including making sure that you don't end up with this join that's going to look like that right on the very corner of your quilt, which is going to be a nightmare. So that there, once it's all done, fold it over with your iron, bit of steam, bit of best press starch. Go ahead and iron that all flat. Wrap it around a bit of cardboard if you're super duper organized. If you're like me, bundle it up and jam it in a cupboard and then look frantically for it when you need it next time. But that is how you cut and stitch your binding, ready to put on a quilt next week. So I have no idea what time it is still. I'm going to guess we're all done. But before we go, I want to tell you guys something. Some of you peeps who used to shop at Sew This and That back in the olden days will remember that Danielle had this wicked product called Parlin, which looked a lot like this. So Parlin is a softer version or flatter version of H630. So this is H630 Pellin and this is Parlin. See how flat it is? Excellent for doing little tiny projects like this where you don't want a lot of fluffiness. We couldn't get it for a long time because unfortunately the distributor of the Parlin brand, a business called Charles Parson, another business closed in Australia, and that meant as a wholesaler, if they couldn't supply us anymore, and we couldn't get Parlin for a long time. But then Shez pointed out to me she came across this really great product that's very, very similar from Birch, and we've just got that in stock so I can suss it out, and I really, really like it. It's $10 a meter. It's a really nice fusible alternative for bags. That little pouch that Cheryl made in our stitch break last time, really good stuff. So glad to say we've got that back in stock. A lot of people were missing it. Thank you very much to Cheryl for telling me where to get it. And speaking of Cheryl, because I missed my Thursday night last week because I thought it was Wednesday, my 3 weeks of binding puts our final binding class right on our stitch break day. So our stitch break will be the following Thursday, which I think might be the 8th. So make sure you tune in for that. Thank you very much to everyone who keeps watching our videos and supporting us. Love your feedback. Love the comments down there. And don't forget to give us a big thumbs up down here when we finish tonight and share it with your friends. I'm going to go and clean up.